first one is really talking about regenerative organic agriculture. And at the Rodale Institute, we've put the word regenerative in there. In the English language, words can mean many different things, and in the States, we've been using the word sustainable or sustainability quite a lot, and you've probably read about that. Rodale Institute has a problem with the word sustainable and sustainability. It's been co-opted by all the chemical companies. They all say that they're sustainable. And we know that we can sustain a poor system if we have enough external inputs. And somebody once said to me, he said, I don't like the word sustainability either. He said, if you asked somebody how their relationship was with their wife or their girlfriend or their husband, and you said, oh, it's sustainable, people would not jump for joy. But if you know that you're dealing with a poor system and it's regenerating, then it's getting better. And we're using organic systems and organic methods to regenerate the soil because we know that we've destroyed the soil. Our founder, J.I. Rodale, started talking about organic agriculture. I don't know what I did. It's on my computer. I apologize. Hopefully it'll stay there. Our founder, J.I. Rodale, started getting interested in agriculture back in 1938. He was a equipment manufacturer. He made big electric switchgears in New York City, him and his brother. And he was of Jewish descent, and he was looking at what was happening in Europe leading up to World War II, and he said part of the problem with Jewish people is they aren't farmers. They're part of the fed society, and that's okay if people choose to feed you, but if they decide not to feed you, you're in trouble. And he also was, when he was younger, he was a rather sickly person, and he went to hear a lecture about how you become what you eat. And that sort of made sense to him. He said, you are what you eat. That makes sense. Didn't know anything about farming, but he bought a farm. And his idea was to move his family during the summer out to the farm, fresh air, countryside, growing food. He never even owned a flower pot, no soil. Suddenly he had about 30 hectares of soil. And so he called the university, the extension educators. He called them and said, what do I do? I don't know anything. Where do I start? And they started telling him about chemical fertilizers and poisons to kill the insects and to manage diseases. And in his mind, he said, in my factory, the quality of the product I make is directly related to the quality of the ingredients I bring in. So how do I bring poison onto a farm and turn that into healthy food? I don't see how that works. And he said, shouldn't I be talking about the soil? And they said, no, that has nothing to do with it. And that didn't sit well with him. So he started reading the kind of work that Sir Albert Howard did and Lady Eve Balfour, and began to restructure in his mind the idea of organic. He was also a bit of a closet writer. He liked to write. He was not very good at it, but he thought he was good at it. And he wrote a magazine called Organic Farming and Gardening in 1942. And he bought a mailing list, and it had 10,000 names on the list. And he mailed the magazine to 10,000 people and said, if you like it, send me the card back and I'll write some more. And he charged them $1. And 10,000 people, he got 7 back. Now, most of us would be very depressed about that and scrap that idea. But J.I. Rodale was a strange person. He said, yesterday there was 1 idiot. Today there's 8 idiots. If we do that every day, that's pretty good math. And so he kept his business going, and it's still going today. And they still publish organic books and magazines, as well as health-related, alternative health-related magazines and books. And the publishing firm outgrew the electrical component business, and he sold that business. And the family still runs a publishing firm. But he died in 1971, and his son Robert Rodale took over. And his son Robert said, these ideas about organic are really exciting, and they're interesting, but people aren't catching on very quickly. The alternative generations that took place in the 60s and 70s, they were interested in organic farming because it was counter to what the conventional world was doing. But he said that's not enough. We really need to begin to think about how we can transition all of agriculture to an organic system and regenerate our soils, or we're doomed. There's some other people that have mentioned the soil in their conversations. Here we have Franklin Roosevelt, who was a president of the United States, and he said, "A nation that destroys its soil destroys itself." Norway is not any different than the United States or Argentina or China. We are all destroying our soil. And as we destroy our soil in a quest for short-term yield, we are running into problems. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we had a lot of snow in Pennsylvania. It snowed about 1 meter in one day. And so we couldn't travel, we couldn't drive. And my wife rented this movie, and we watched it. Anybody see this movie? Yeah, a few people have seen it. The premise of the movie is this poor guy gets abandoned on Mars, and he doesn't have enough food, but he's a botanist. And so in his food, he had some potatoes. Now, anybody that knows anything about potatoes today knows that they would be sprayed with sprout inhibitors and they wouldn't grow. But in the movie, they did grow. And so he gathered up soil and he made a greenhouse and he planted the potatoes. And what he said is, because I have soil, I can live. The same thing is true on earth. Because we have soil, we live. Without soil, we don't live. In the United States, we have serious problems with erosion. I'm sure you do in Norway as well. In the center of the United States, we have a state of Iowa. Iowa is a very flat state. It's very big in growing grain, corn and soybeans, but also wheat and barley and oats, a lot of grain. And every time it rains, it washes down the Mississippi River. It washes thousands of miles away into the ocean. So much that you can see it from outer space on a satellite. This is where the land stops. All of this is soil that is washing into the ocean. In fact, there's so much phosphorus in this water that's washing into the ocean that it's killing the ocean life. And so much phosphorus that they're actually developing plans now to suck the soil back up off the ocean floor to process the phosphorus out of it so they can send it back to Iowa and wash it down the river again. It's crazy. If somebody would tell you that was the plan, you would think they were insane. But that is the plan of how we are going to build sustainability into the U.S. agricultural system. Giant vacuum cleaners to suck phosphorus off the ocean floor. And in fact, we have millions of acres that lose up to 20 tons of soil every year. 20 tons. We cannot sustain that. Yet they say the system is sustainable. They are practicing sustainable agriculture. It certainly is not regenerative agriculture or organic. And in fact, the World Wildlife Federation says that nationwide, the United States has lost 1.7 billion tons of soil. And if you look globally across the planet, we have already lost half of our soil just in the last 150 years. So we lived for tens of thousands of years on the earth without erosion, and suddenly, because of agriculture and because of the way we're farming, not because we're farming, but because of the way we're farming, we have destroyed half of our resource. If that math continues, in another 150 years, we're done. And certainly that's not sustainable. And the reason we got in this problem, or we're in this situation, is because we only consider yield as a measuring stick for our success. That is the biggest problem. Whenever farmers gather in a room like this, they always talk about their yield. How many tons, well, we still use bushels because we're archaic, but how many bushels I grow, how many pounds, how many tons, how many kilos, how much do I produce? And we measure each other by that success. But if that's the only measuring stick we use, then we can get in trouble. If we use that same scenario to measure ourselves as human beings, then we would say, whoever has the most money in the room is successful and everybody else, you're garbage. That's not the measuring stick by which we judge the success of ourselves as people. We cannot use yield as the only success for the measuring of our system. And so this corn plant wasn't planted in the river. The river ate the soil away and took the field away. Nobody wants to raise cattle like that. People get in the cattle business because they actually like cattle, not because they want to put them in giant feedlots and raise 30, 40,000 at a time. But there was a study done here a few years ago where a journalist bought a little calf on a farm in Iowa, and then he tracked that calf through its whole life as it went from one farm to a bigger farm to a bigger farm to a feedlot in the state of Nebraska, where it lived like that, and then it got sold, and he got the profit. He got $3.35. He said, who would raise an animal for 18 months, feed it, water it, care for it, for $3.85? There's some years there's more profit, there's some years there's losses. The only way to make that work is to have 30,000 of them, so if you get $3 a piece, now you made $100,000 a year, and you can be successful. The same thing is true with chickens. And people in what's the beauty of the system, the way it's working today, is consumers are starting to recognize this, and they don't want it either. And they're willing to support an agricultural system that makes changes. We're also drastically changing the way we as humans interact with our food. I saw this on the news back in 2011, and I quickly went on the computer and got a screenshot, and you just have to ignore the fact that Lady Gaga fell off the stage. I don't, just ignore that part. But because of the way we're eating, we have changed when young girls enter the age of puberty. They said in 1800 it was 18 years old, in 1960 it was 14, now it is 11. And since I saw this, I saw a study that said if you break it down between urban and rural girls, urban girls it is as low as 8. 8-year-old girls could biologically get pregnant. It's crazy. We have changed the way we interact with ourselves, and it's because of the way we think about the soil. When they asked the doctor who presented this information, what can we do to stop that? She said, the only thing you can do is eat organic food. I was amazed that the doctor said that on national television. And as farmers, we've known, this is old information from way back in 1992, but we have known that we're killing ourselves as farmers. My wife's uncle was a farmer. He died of Parkinson's disease. His wife died of Parkinson's disease. Both my in-laws died of cancer. They were very frugal German farmers. And they used all the modern technology, which is herbicides and chemicals, and they would mix the sprayer by the well. Now, they would mix it as far away as the hose would reach. But as time progressed, the hose wore out, and so they cut it and spliced it. They didn't go buy a new one because that was money. And so the sprayer got closer and closer to the well until it was right at the well. And I dated my wife. We've been together forever. I remember in high school, I would go to her house, and her father had already died, and her uncle would come in the house and turn on the spigot and smell it and say, yep, that's atrazine. I wouldn't drink it until it smells better. Don't drink it till it smells better. That's how farmers were treating themselves and killing themselves. This is some really interesting work by Dr. Elizabeth Gillette at the University of Florida in the United States. And what she did was she did her studies in the Yucca Valley of Mexico. Because after World War II, the United States and big agribusiness went into Mexico and said the same thing that we did in the Central Valley of California, which is a huge breadbasket for the world. They said the same thing we did for you, we did for ourselves, we can do for you. And so they brought chemical agriculture into the Central Valley of Mexico. But the tribe of people that lived there, the Yaqui Indians, some of them didn't like the idea, and so they got forced up into the hillside. The people on the big flat land the Yaquis who accepted the new technology stayed on the flat land. So you had one homogeneous population genetically that was forced to separate because of a cultural difference of how they were going to grow crops. And what Dr. Gillette did was she worked with only females because of the Latin culture. She wasn't allowed to work with men. So there's a lot of room to study boys. But what she did was she said, these are about 4-year-old, 5-year-old children. She asked them to draw a picture of themselves. The young girls in the mountains, in the foothills, drew this picture. Eyes, nose, mouth, some arms and legs. The young girls in the valley floor where the chemicals are drew those pictures. She asked them, she said, does this look like you? They said yes. They couldn't recognize that. Same thing here. Couldn't draw pictures of themselves. If you read her work, she said, I would play games with the children, and I would say, if you play a game with me, at the end of the game, I will give you a present, and the present will be a red balloon. And then she played the game. At the end of the game, the girls in the valley floor could not remember what present they were going to get, or that they were even going to get a present. The girls in the foothills said, I want my red balloon. We played the game, I want my red balloon. We are changing the way our brains function simply by changing the way we manage soil. So I encourage you to look up her work as well. And then we say, at least in the United States, this is the big thing we tell farmers all the time. We tell farmers, you have to feed the world. It's okay to sacrifice the soil because we have to feed the world. When in fact, 50% of the food we produce gets thrown away. So we're wasting lots of food. There's a reason we struggle with childhood obesity, problems with insulin. It's not because children want to eat more. It's because they're eating empty calories. The average 14-year-old boy in the United States drinks 2 liters of sugary fruit soda. 2 liters of sugar. They said in every 20 ounces there's 16 spoonsful of sugar. No nutritional value at all, but lots of calories. So we're getting all of these empty calories and we're getting obese. So they're malnourished, but they're obese. It's crazy. And at the same time, we're polluting our wells. Now, I know you don't use atrazine in Norway. I think it's banned in Norway. But we make it in the United States, so it's not banned there. We use it like it's going out of style. And our farm is over here in Pennsylvania, and this is the center part of the United States, and every place there's an arrow, there is a municipal well that is polluted with atrazine beyond the Environmental Protection Agency's drinking standards. They cannot get that out of the well. So what did we do in the United States? We changed the drinking standard, and now none of those wells are polluted anymore. It was very simple. It's happening all over the world. We're destroying the soil, destroying the water, destroying our resources. And all that soil that you saw coming out of Iowa up here that runs down the Mississippi into the Gulf of Mexico, that's thousands of miles. United States, many of you have been there, I know. It's huge. And all that soil is disappearing. And not just from Iowa, but from every state that runs along that river and every state in the country. So along comes organic. The beauty of this system is consumers are driving the system. They've created a $72 billion business. Not the government, not big ag industry. Somebody asked me the other day at a meeting similar to this, they said, well, Monsanto is pushing conventional agriculture. What business is pushing organic? I said, no business. Consumers, customers want this product. As customers understand this story, they begin to ask questions. And as they ask questions, they want answers, and the answers they're getting they don't like. And so they're demanding organic products. We have a lot of problems in the United States. Consumer demand is far outstripping supply. So we have many, many more opportunities to sell products than we have people producing it. So much of in Pennsylvania, for example, we grow a lot of corn. But 33% of our organic corn comes from Romania. 10% comes from Argentina. A few percent come from China and India. So over half of the organic corn that we use in our state comes from around the world. And part of the other half doesn't come from Pennsylvania, it comes from other states in the United States that's imported in. So I have a friend in Argentina, Fernando Rivera. He owns a very large farm, about 18,000 hectares, all certified organic. And he said to me the last time I was there at his farm, he said, Jeff, we know each other fairly well, so I feel comfortable asking you this question. He said, are farmers in Pennsylvania stupid? I don't think so. Why do you ask? Well, he said, here's how it works in Argentina. I grow my corn organically. I put it on a truck. I ship it to the port. I put it on a ship. And then because our government is corrupt, I have to pay an export tariff that is unreasonable because they know that my corn is worth more than conventional corn and they want some of that money. So I pay my tariff and I send the ship to Baltimore, Maryland, right out near Pennsylvania. Then I take it off the ship and I put it on a truck and I drive it into Pennsylvania and I'm making money. You, meaning all the farmers in Pennsylvania, he said, you farm literally in the shadow of the building I deliver it to. And he delivers it to a big mill that makes chicken feed for Purdue Chicken. Frank Purdue, who owns Purdue Chicken, one of the largest chicken businesses in the world, did not drink the organic Kool-Aid and want to be organic. He is looking at what consumers are telling him, and he's going to raise organic chickens. And he needs to get the grain somewhere. But farmers in Pennsylvania, we're all old and we're stubborn. We're Pennsylvania Germans. We don't change too quickly. And then we have government subsidies that prop up and sustain a non-regenerative system. But there's a huge market out there, and we can grow for that market, and Norway can grow for that market too. It's not just a U.S. problem. In fact, when we look at this and we think about organic as a way to feed the world, this is some data that came from the University of Michigan. A team of scientists there did a global study to see what would happen if all of the world transitioned to organic. Could we feed the population that we have today? And what they said was they had two different models that they looked at, and the first model yielded just a little bit under the current world production. You can see these numbers. Roughly 2,641 kilocalories per person per day. And currently we're producing this. But the second model that they used, looking at organic agriculture that actually took into account some modern science, we jumped to over 4,000 calories per day, twice as many as we need by farming organically. And so they said, in fact, the only way to sustain a larger human population is by farming organically. We cannot do it with our sustainable conventional systems. And I just put this up here because people don't often understand how much pesticide and chemical we're actually dumping on the ground. We're going to talk a lot about soil health here today and about life in the soil. And if you've got soil that you're trying to encourage and build up the life in your soil, and then you dump 1.1 billion pounds of pesticides on it, it's hard to imagine what 1 billion pounds is. And you do that year after year after year after year, and you don't expect it to show up in your food or your water, then you truly are an idiot. How can people not think that's going to happen? And the reason it happens is because it's an $11 billion industry. Nobody wants to give up that $11 billion. But we have systems in place. We didn't design them. We can manipulate them and learn to work with them, but we have systems in place that are based on plants. So we're going to talk a lot about the relationship between plants and soil, because we need both together. We don't eat soil. If we could just eat soil, things would be much easier. Honors would just have a nice big pile of compost down there. We go down and munch on that, and it would be good. But that's not what happens. We need plants. When we don't have plants growing on the soil, and I saw some fields here in Norway that were tilled up last fall. They did fall tillage, bare ground sitting there empty. How can we expect the earthworms to live in that soil, or the microbes? They cannot. They cannot live there. They will not live there. And then what happens is we come in spring and we say, oh, time to get to work. But there's nothing there to work. If all of you were Olympic athletes, I'm trying to picture it. Some of you maybe, most of us not. But if you were an Olympic athlete and you laid on the couch and did nothing from the time September came to the time May came, and then they expected you to get up and perform at your Olympic capacity, you could not do it. But that's what we ask the soil to do. We kill it with pesticides and salt-based fertilizers, and then we don't have any plants growing on it for most of the year. And then in spring we put plants in the ground and go, come on, do your thing. And they can't. They go, see, we need inputs. You can't grow crops without inputs. We need to start thinking about these cycles and how we're going to encourage plants to come back into our systems. And mainly so we can improve the biodiversity of our soils. So if all of you were farmers and I would ask you, how many of you are livestock farmers? Everybody in the room should put up their hand. Because you all have livestock, it's just under the ground. You can't see it. It doesn't have big brown eyes and go moo, but it's down there. In fact, there's more life under the soil than there is above the soil. It's really a carbon problem. This whole problem that we have with our climate, and thinking we're going to start talking about climate change a little bit, it's all because we don't have carbon at the right place. That microbial life in the soil that you do have is basically born starving and homeless. It's our job as farmers to give them a home. What J.I. Rodale said when he wrote those words that I showed you on a blackboard there, healthy soil equals healthy food equals healthy people. What J.I. Rodale was telling us is our job as farmers is not to produce food. It is to produce healthy people. And the only way we can have healthy people is if we have healthy soil. So our job is to manage the soil. And if we do a good job of managing the soil, the crops will come. They will come because the biology of the system will be doing the work, not you and me. And the biology of the system is better at it than we are. Our job is to manage resources and get carbon into the soil so there's a home for that microbial life to live. They live in carbon. This is some data, we'll talk about it more this afternoon, from our farming systems trial that is showing where in 1981, when we started the experiment, we had 3 different systems. We had an organic manure system, an organic legume-based system, and a conventional system. The conventional system uses pesticides and chemical fertilizer. The conventional system, even farming and research plots where we're trying to monitor things and do the very best we possibly can, we're losing carbon. We can't hold it. So when people say sustainability and we got to sustain what we have, we can't. Because we've created a system that destroys it. The organic systems are gaining carbon. Now, even the manure system here does not have any grazing on it. So we've sort of plateaued there around 4.5% organic matter, while the rest of the farm at Rodale is getting closer to 7%. But we have animals. And so we think if we add grazing, we can keep building on that. Animals are key to the success. But even without animals, we can improve our soil as we use it. So what Bob Rodale was saying to us is, if we think about the soil as a system of biological components, then the more we exercise it, the stronger it gets. He was an avid bicycle rider. In fact, he built a velodrome for the Olympic bicycle team to train at. And he said, when I ride my bicycle, the only thing that wears out is the bicycle. I get stronger. I get healthier. So our job, he said, is to exercise the soil to make it stronger. You don't want to overwork it. You got to feed it, house it, water it, and work it. If you don't work it, nature is lazy. It will die. It will fade away. It needs a job. It wants a job to do. And part of it is to decompose carbon, and we got to put carbon into the system. Carbon does so many things for us. Obviously, it mitigates climate change. If we can take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it in the soil, we know that that's healthy. But it does all these other things. It changes the water infiltration and holding capacity of the soil. So the reason Iowa is washing down the Mississippi River is not because we farm it, it's because of the way we farm it. If we change the way we farm it, we can improve the soil, we can regenerate it. We have to farm it organically. Get the salt-based fertilizer out of the system. Get the pesticides out of the system. Build the biology of the soil. Get carbon into the soil. And as we do that, using cover crops and compost and crop rotations, we can have more water infiltration and less runoff. Now the soil stays where it belongs. Now we don't need that big giant vacuum cleaner to suck phosphorus off the ocean floor. Now those people who are designing that might not be happy, but the world should be happy if that happens. And what we're really talking about is a brown revolution, not a green revolution. We got to get more brown into the soil. Our soil isn't as brown as it used to be. It used to be dark brown. Now it's yellow. That's loss of carbon. So there's a couple of things that we need to do. We certainly want to keep the soil covered. So those fields that I saw that were plowed in fall, those farmers should be fined. We need government policies that go out there and say, sorry, you're destroying the soil not just for yourself, but for everybody. You have to pay extra if you farm that way. Well, we can do that if we choose to. We just haven't chose to do that. So we got to keep the soil covered. We have to maximize the living roots in the soil. Everything you see above ground is below ground. In Pennsylvania, we have a general rule of thumb for grazing cattle. And it's just an average. They say we can, we go in acres, not hectares, but we say we can grow 1,000 pounds of animals per acre. So about a metric ton per hectare. That's what we can graze. Below ground, we can graze 20 times that amount. The important life is in the soil. But in order for that to happen, we have to have green living roots for those microbes to live. They cannot live without getting energy from the sun. They can't lay on the surface and go to the beach and lay on the surface and get sunlight. They have to get their energy from plant roots. And so we need those plant roots. We need to make that happen. Plants trade carbon to fungi and bacteria. Mycorrhizal fungi in the soil fix nitrogen, and they work with the plants to gather water and nutrients. Why would a plant, having had millions of years to generate a mechanism of defense, allow a fungus to deliberately bore into its cell wall? Why would it allow that to happen? Unless the plant is getting something in return. So the plant says, sure, I'll get energy from the sun, I'll turn it into sugar and carbohydrates, and I'll give it to you so you can grow, but you go and get me water, phosphorus, nitrogen, and micronutrients. And you bring them back to me, and I'll give you some sugar in exchange. That's the system. Now, when we spray Roundup or glyphosate, it kills mycorrhizal fungi. That's not why farmers apply it. So if you're a farmer who's applying it, I understand that's not the reason you put it on the soil. But a side effect to killing weeds is you kill mycorrhizal fungi. So now the plant can't have that relationship with the fungus because the fungus isn't there. And it struggles for nutrients, so you have to put more in. It's a great system if you're selling fertilizer. We create a leaky bucket, and then we sell people salt water to put in the bucket. It's great system, but not for the soil. And we can see how it changes the water use of the fields. People say all the time, especially in the United States, they'll say, well, we have crop insurance to pay farmers in case of a drought or if there's too much rain. We drought-proof our soils. We flood-proof our soils by changing the amount of carbon that's in the soil. We can do that as farmers. If I can do it on my farm at home, if we can do it at Rodale Institute, we can do it on every farm in Norway too. We just have to decide that that's an important task. But you can see that wheat up there, it didn't rain more on those. Those plots are only 5 feet apart in the field. What that's saying is it's showing us that the way we farm can change the soil. We have that power as farmers. It's an amazing responsibility and power that we can actually change the soil. We cannot change the soil quality. For many years, we talked about soil quality. We no longer want to talk about soil quality. I want to talk about soil health. People in the scientific world resisted using the word health in talking about soil. Because once you do that, then you admit that it's alive. Then you admit that there is a dynamic state of being that you can impact, positively or negatively. If all you talk about is quality, then it's inert. This can be a high-quality table. This can be a high-quality watch. It's not, but it could be. But it can't be a healthy watch. It's dead. It's inert. There's no life. Soil, we talk about health. The quality of your soil is what you start with. You cannot change it. It's what you inherit. It's what you purchased. It's what you rent or you stole or however you got it. You can't, but you can change the way that soil responds in terms of its dynamic state of health. So where that organic wheat is growing, they were planted on the same day in the same soil quality, but different health. So how do we want to farm? We need to ask ourselves those questions. Here's a picture of those same types of plots in our long-term study, which we're going to talk about after this, where we're looking at corn. It did not rain more on this corn. This is dry land farming. There's no irrigation. In fact, the conventional corn over on the your right was planted 2 weeks earlier than the organic corn. And it looked great. And then it stopped raining. This was 1995, a very bad drought year for us. The organic corn didn't care about the drought. It just kept growing. The reason it could grow was because there was mycorrhizal fungi that had inoculated the hair roots. And the fungi was going and getting water and bringing it to the plant because the fungus doesn't want to die. So the fungus says, I got a job to do. I got to go get work because I got to keep this plant alive because if the plant dies, I die. It's all connected. So there's what Bob Rodale said when we designed these projects was he said, we have to begin to put science behind the conversation or we can't get farmers to change. We can't get universities to think about these systems differently if we don't put science behind it. So this particular project, and we'll talk about it more, has now been in place for 35 years. And people are looking at that science all across the country. So again, we have new solutions. We have a new way of thinking about farming. Yes, chemistry and biotechnology are legitimate sciences. But so is biology. You can go to any university you want and study biology. Now, chemistry is a very clean science. I can take 2 beakers of chemicals, mix them together here on this desk, and I will get a reaction. I get the same reaction next week, a year from now, here in Norway, in the United States, or in Brazil, it doesn't matter. I get the same reaction. Biology is a very messy science. It is not clean. It is not easily transferred. So the work that I do at Rodale is not directly relevant to the work you're going to do in Norway. The way we think about it, the way we challenge ourselves will be the same. But the actual practical inputs are going to be different because it's different soil, different weather. Different vectors are impacting that. That's the challenge that we face as farmers and ag professionals. Because people always say to me, well, if you just had a recipe, everybody would do it. And I said, if I had a recipe, it would be completely wrong for you. You show me 2 farmers that are doing the same thing and one of them is doing it wrong. Because their soil's different, their weather's different, their resources are different. Their goals may be different. So we need to think about that. You eat, I don't know, some spicy food you eat today, no problem. You eat it tomorrow, upset stomach. What happened? I don't know. Everything's different in your body chemistry changes. The soil changes the same way. So what worked this year doesn't work next year. That's frustrating. It's challenging. But it's in that challenge that we can improve the health of the soil, and we can improve the health of the farms, and we can improve the health of people. We're really talking about using resources differently. This was in California a few years ago. These are raisin grapes. I stood in the middle of the road and took a picture facing one direction, turned 180 degrees and took a picture in the opposite direction. Which side of the road do you want to live on? You're an earthworm, you're a soil microbe, you're a bird or a butterfly. It's pretty obvious. They're the same resources. It could even be the same farmer, I don't know. Same trellis system, same crop, same soil quality, different soil health. Which raisin grapes do we want to buy? And as consumers are beginning to see these pictures and get a mental picture in their mind of what it is they want to purchase, everybody's going to start shopping on the other side of the road. So, how are you using the resources that you have? If you're farming, how are you using those resources? Are you actually using them to the best of your ability? Maybe raisin grapes aren't even the best thing they should be growing. I don't know. We have to start asking ourselves very complicated questions. And that's challenging, and it's frustrating, and it's scary in many ways to begin to ask those questions of ourselves. But we all have goals for coming here today. I know you do. I don't know what they all are. They could all be different. My goal is to inspire you to think about those resources that you have differently. If it's an office staff, how are you using those office staff people? How are you using the responsibility and the authority that you have if you're in government? If you're on a farm, how are you using your resources? And how can you change that? That's my goal, is to get you to think differently. Obviously, I can't solve everybody's problem in this room. I wish I could, but it's not that simple. It's much more complex. But again, that complexity is wonderful. You look at the budgets, people talk about economics, and they say, yes, but I have to make money. Okay, I agree. This happens to be corn because the United States grows a lot of corn, and around the world we grow a lot of corn. And across the top, you're looking at organic with tillage, organic no-till. We're going to talk more about that this afternoon. Conventional with some tillage, in this case a chisel plow, and conventional no-till. Most farmers today are farming sort of in this column. And if you got 100 bushel, I know this is really archaic, but the numbers are relevant. They're all relative to each other. So if you had 100 bushel of corn, in the organic systems, you made a good profit. In the conventional systems, you lost $16 an acre when you were using tillage. And then all the modern farmers say, yes, but I'm a modern farmer, I use no-till. Oh, you lost $85. Now, the same amount of crop was produced, so the farm made the same amount of money. It's just that the chemical company figured out a way to take more of your money. Here, the resources are internalized. And we have different yields here. And this work was all done using Mississippi State, which is the university ag economists, because we don't have an economist at Rodale. We don't have enough work to hire a full-time economist. So we work with other people to do that work. But it actually strengthens the work because it's not just Rodale looking at numbers and saying organic works better. People would say, no kidding. Rodale figured out organics better. I'm shocked. But here, the data is funneled through other people's models, computer models. So we know that we can improve the health of the soil. There's one measuring stick. That's not yield. We're improving the health of the soil. We're making more money, another measuring stick. And what do farmers take to the bank? You take grain to the bank? You take cucumbers to the bank? No. You take kroners to the bank. So you want more money. That's a better measuring stick than yield. We have to start looking at that. And you can tell that we're making headway because people get really nervous when you start questioning the status quo. When you start to rock the boat. When you start to say, hey, there's a better way to do this, people. The people who are doing it the conventional way get really upset. And then they do all these kinds of studies where they look at this. This was in Nature magazine back in May of 2012. And the headline from the newspaper said, overall organic yields are typically lower than conventional yields. but. Now, I know English isn't your first language, but my wife was an English major, and she always says, whenever you say the word but, it means you can negate everything in front of it. So when I say, I love you, but, she's waiting for what comes after the but, because that's the real meat of the matter. What it really said was, under certain conditions, that is, with good management practices, particular crop types and growing conditions, organic systems can nearly match conventional yields. That's what it really said. But that's not what the newspaper printed. They printed that. And here we saw, right here, it says, but. So everything above that, throw away. What the headline could have said was, with very few research dollars, organic production nearly that of conventional. Because in the United States, in the private sector, on an annual basis, they spend $3.8 billion on research. The U.S. government spends an additional $1.8 billion. And in organic research, we had $15 million. So with $15 million, and this is old information because I couldn't find any current stuff, but with such small dollars, we're the same yield. Imagine if we took all the minds, not just in this room, but all the minds that are working on those private sector and government projects and put them behind organic. If we took the brains that are thinking about sucking phosphorus off the ocean floor and put it behind organic, imagine where we would be today. Just imagine what those headlines would say. There was another headline in there. It said, Stanford scientists cast doubt on advantages of organic meat and produce. That's what the headline said in the New York Times. But when you actually read the paper, what the paper said was 2 of the studies showed significantly lower urinary pesticide levels among children. That's what the studies said. They just chose not to report that. So when people see the New York Times headlines, they just say that the meat, was it better or was it worse? It says the risk for isolating bacteria resistant to antibiotics was higher in conventional than organic chicken and pork. That's what the papers actually said that they studied, but that's not what they wrote. Since then, that whole Stanford study has been recounted and thrown away, but the newspaper articles were already written. Just wanted to show you a little bit about our farming systems trial. We're going to jump into that next, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. We have 3 different systems in there, an organic manure-based system, an organic legume-based system, and a conventionally based system. The reason we have those different treatments there is because in 1981, the U.S. government did a study, and they said, well, if the work that Rodale has been doing for the last 30 or 40 years is actually true, why aren't more farmers adopting these systems? Obviously, there's barriers to adoption. And what farmers said in general was there was a real question about nitrogen because they buy nitrogen fertilizer. They said the only way to get nitrogen fertilizer on an organic farm is by having livestock. So if you don't want livestock, you can't be an organic farmer. That was kind of the mindset. But some of us paid attention in junior high chemistry, and we learned that there are legumes that through a symbiotic relationship with rhizobia bacteria will take nitrogen out of the air. 78% of the air we breathe is nitrogen. Nitrogen is not a limiting resource on planet Earth. There's lots of it. We don't have to buy it from our salesman. We can get it for free from the air. So we have that system in there, and then of course we kept 1/3 of the fields as chemically based treatments. And then in 2008, we split these systems by tillage. So it's a very complicated long-term experiment. And as we look at this, we look at yields and we look at all kinds of things, not just yields. In a typical scientific experiment, they would just look at yields, but we look at all of these other components. These are some older soil samples held in the hands of Dr. Ray Weil from the University of Maryland, who took them from our research plots. And you can see, even in this old picture in this poorly lit room, you can see a difference in color. Imagine what the microbes that live in the soil can tell. We don't live there. We live from there, but we don't live there. Earthworms can tell the difference. Look what happens when you put those clumps of soil in water. And you can reproduce this test over and over on your own farm. It's pretty amazing. So again, the reason that our soil is washing away is not because we farm it, it's because of the way we farm it. We have destroyed all the mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi form a material called glomalin. Glomalin is a glue. It glues the soil together so it stays in place. The fungus wants to work for us, and we continuously kill it. I'm going to jump past some of this because I think I have more of this coming up. Thinking about nitrogen and nitrogen fertilizer. People, I assume, are familiar with the Haber-Bosch process of making nitrogen fertilizer. It's the same process that they developed for making explosives. In fact, that's what they developed it for, and then they found out that all the excess explosives that they had from World War I would make really nice fertilizer, so they could dump it out on farmers' fields. It's just salt. But it takes a lot of energy to do that. When again, we've got plants and bacteria that will do it for us for free, but you actually have to plant the plants. So on our farm, when you come to our farm in the winter, you will not see any bare soil. You will see legumes out there grabbing nitrogen out of the air and putting it in the soil so that when my Olympic athlete soil wakes up in spring, it's ready to work. I did some work on some Amish farms, and they use horsepower. And we were trying to get the farmer to make compost, and he wouldn't do it. And I said, why don't you make compost? He said, I use my horses to spread manure every day, even in the winter. If I don't have work for the horse in the winter, he will stay in the barn. And then in spring, when I want the horse to go to work, he's going to be fat and lazy, and he's not going to work. He said, I got to have that horse exercising all day, every day, all year long, or we both get fat and lazy. The same thing is true with the soil. We want it to work. We don't want a fat, lazy soil. We want an Olympic athlete, and this is what our fields look like, not bare soil. In fact, Tropicana orange juice is owned by Pepsi. Pepsi Corporation owns Tropicana orange juice. And in 2009, they did a carbon footprint study of their whole business. How much carbon do they take up to put orange juice on breakfast tables around the world? And they really were looking specifically at packaging and shipping to try to figure out how they could reduce their carbon footprint. What they found out was 58% of their carbon footprint was nitrogen fertilizer to fertilize the orange trees when they can get it for free. Packaging was 15%, distribution was 22%. I mean, no matter how you cut it, if you cut this in half and you can't do that, you could save 10%. They can save 58% right off the top because we can take it from the air and put it in the soil for free. Just plant legumes under the orange trees. All the organic orange groves have legumes under the trees. The conventional guys still buy nitrogen fertilizer. It's crazy. And this isn't Rodale doing this study. This is Tropicana looking at their own process. So we know we can have an impact. Now, we talk about soil health, and we know that it's important the way we manage soil. But we also know that tillage has its drawbacks. And keep in mind, there are hundreds of billions of microbes holding that thing up, and earthworms, it's standing on somebody's head. That's not... So we talk about soil health, and then we go out there and we do this. Even organic farmers. When we know there's no new ways to think about farming. Again, we just need to think about what it is we're trying to accomplish, and people are incredibly brilliant and smart. If we can do this and farm like this, how much better is that for the microbial life of the soil? There never isn't a green living root on that soil. It's just one plant following another plant. So we're developing these kinds of tools. And then, of course, we know that animals belong on farms, not in feedlots. This is an environmental nightmare down here in the bottom. Those cows poop all day, every day. I was at a farm in New Mexico that had a feedlot like that, and I said, well, what do you do with the manure? And he said, we put it over there. And I said, over where? He said, there. I said, I don't see it. He said, that isn't a mountain. That's 30 years of manure because we don't know what to do with it. I mean, it looked like a mountain range, and that was just cow poop. So the best thing they could think of do with that resource was jam the cows together and make a mountain out of poop. I think they were not thinking clearly. No industry would do that. And the animals are sick, so they have to be treated with antibiotics all the time. There's all those pipes in there, those are water pipes, so they can spray water over them to keep them cool and keep the dust down. Because in New Mexico it doesn't rain, so if they don't keep the dust down, they said you could not see the cows. The cows couldn't see each other. There'd just be so much manure dust in the air. It'd be a cloud floating over these huge pens. So they spray water on it to knock the dust down, and the cows get to stand in their own poop, and then we eat that and say, I saw McDonald's down the street down here. You can go get some today if you want it. When animals should be out on farms, helping us sequester carbon, get that carbon out of that mountain of manure, get it back in the soil where we can use it and where we can create homes for our microbial life. We know that there's a lot of challenges as we convince people to transition and regenerate their farms. So we've developed some very dynamic web tools at Rodale that we encourage you to come and use. Come and look at what we're doing and share your information with us. We're in the process right now of creating a Rodale membership, which will be launched in fall based on a magazine called New Farm. Back when Bob J.I. Rodale created Organic Gardening and Farming magazine, he was talking to two different audiences. And it took him a few years to realize that, but farmers weren't interested in garden technology, and gardeners weren't interested in farmer stories because it's too big, they couldn't relate to it. So he separated that, and he created two separate magazines. And the one was called Organic Gardening Magazine, and the other one was called New Farm. The reason it was called New Farm was they had bought a second farm, and whenever somebody was going to the farm, they would say, I'm going to the farm, but they had to say which one, so they would say either the new one or the old one. So they had the old farm and the new farm. And the new farm is the Rodale Institute. That's our world headquarters. And so we have a magazine called New Farm Magazine, and we're going to relaunch that and create a farmer membership so that everybody in this room can be a partner in what we're doing and sharing that information. Okay. We're just about finished with this segment of my presentation, so it's very appropriate for the microphone to go out. Just wanted to talk about how much food we actually can produce. I only use this slide because 2 weeks ago I was in the state of Kentucky in the United States, which is a very rural state, very poor soil. And we're looking at numbers, but they had 13 million acres of farmland. At the Rodale Institute, we have a CSA, it's called Community Supported Agriculture. It's where we sell subscriptions to farmers, to consumers, and they come out to our farm and they pick up a box of produce every week. And on 6 acres, so it's a little less than 3 hectares, we can feed 225 families of 4. So roughly 1,000 people. That would mean that the lowly little state of Kentucky could actually feed almost 2 billion people. A third of the world's population could be fed in the little state of Kentucky. Imagine what Norway can do if Norway wants to produce food. Tremendous amounts of food can be produced on relatively small acres if we change the way we manage that system. Now, we have 2 different ways of selling food through our CSA. A CSA means that you have to have money, because you pay for your food up front. It's a great system for a young farmer getting started because they have all of their resources and then they grow food for their customers throughout the year. It works out well, but there are a lot of people who don't have that much money in the beginning of the season. So we rearranged these letters. Instead of saying that communities support agriculture, we put the A first and we said agriculture actually supports communities. If you don't think so, stop farming. The community will die. New York City, they said, can live for 3 days without trucks moving food into New York City. Oslo is probably not much different. The food has to come in or the community dies. So we have agriculture supporting communities, and that's run as a subscription service where people pay with, we have a program called SNAP Dollars. They have a credit card. It's like food stamps. They get free food from the government for their families, and they can pay with that. In fact, we worked out an arrangement with the government where they can have twice as much organic food as they would if they bought junk in the supermarket or at a convenience store. Now, those people don't have cars or transportation, so we deliver the food into community centers or churches, or even schools where they can eat. But we have 185 members with that, and our CSA is now 285 members. So on 4 acres, we feed 185 poor families. So we know we can do this if we choose to do it. We really have to change the way people think. And that's my reason for coming to Norway, is to change the way some of you are thinking. We have to realize that regenerative agriculture can have a positive impact on climate change. So just changing the way we farm can have more impact on removing carbon from the atmosphere than any other thing we can do on the planet Earth. Just changing the way, and I think we've already demonstrated that we can have all the food we want, we can improve the soil, and we can improve the climate to the point where we could actually, and this is a mathematical game now, if every acre of land that's being farmed and managed in the world were transitioned to organic, we could take over 100% of the carbon out of the atmosphere, which would mean we would not have to change one thing in the way we live. Now, I'm not suggesting we don't do that. We should conserve energy, obviously. We should try to prevent carbon from leaking into the system. But even if we said as a population, we don't want to do that. We don't want to change anything. Let's just change the way we produce food. We could sequester 111% of the carbon out of the atmosphere, which means we'd actually start save everything we have so we wouldn't be adding to the problem, plus take 11% a year out of the atmosphere and get it back into the soil. Simply by changing the way we farm. Using organic principles and thinking about the soil in a regenerative fashion. Now that means we have to change public policy. So we all have a job to do here. Whether you're a farmer or not, you have a role to play. As consumers, as advocates, as voters, we all have to stand up and say, this is important and it's time to wake up and do this and change the way we farm. I started with a quote from Theodore Roosevelt and finished with one from another president, Thomas Jefferson, who said, "While a farmer holds the title to the land, actually it belongs to all the people, because civilization itself rests upon the soil." Truly it does. And it does belong to all of us. So what your neighbors are doing does impact you. It does impact your grandchildren and their potential future. And so we really need to think about that.